So, Jonathan, I wanted to talk to you about, the impetus of this new book, Sparked, and the Spark type assessment. However, understanding now the different types and that you're a maker and a scientist, I understand that you probably just moved on to other things, and so we don't have a whole lot of talk to talk about today. Am I right?
Ah man, I am still very much in the process of creation and evolution within this body of work. So I'm
Okay.
still fully in it for at least the near future.
Okay. Well, I'm going to try to do justice to talk about a lot of it, but I'm going to have a really hard time not just talking about myself and my own type, especially because I happen to have the exact same profile as you.
Ah, no kidding.
So I'm a maker and a scientist. And I did that, I read about it, but then, of course, took the test. Second day, got the email talking about the maker. Today, got the email about the scientist. And yeah, interesting. They're so similar. I mean, it feels like you're kind of, so I'll just focus on you. You're kind of true blue. You like to make, create things, and you like to make and create things, and you like to make, I mean, you're pretty solid across it. How similar is that, where you find people are real common with their primary and shadow, as opposed to a, a balance? Maybe it doesn't feel so
Yeah,
balanced. Yeah.
I think it really depends on each individual. You can look at so the way that it works is, you take the assessment and then you get assigned what we call a primary sparketype,
Yeah.
which I see as your strongest impulse for effort, the thing get up in the morning and you would work really hard at for no other reason than the way it makes you feel. And then there's this other thing that you're referencing that I call the shadow sparketype. And you can look at that as one of two ways: as your runner up, and that could be a close runner up or a pretty far away runner up. And we usually have a pretty decent sense of what that is for us. But there's often a more nuanced relationship. And that is that very often we do the work of the shadow in order to be able to do the work of our primary at a higher level. Um, so it and this shows up differently for different people. So we're both maker scientists. That's how we would phrase it: maker primary, scientist shadow. So I like maker slash scientist. And the way it shows up in my life, and maybe I'm curious actually how it shows up in yours too, is I open my eyes in the morning and it's all about the process of creation. I want to have actual output. I want to go from idea to something. That is the thing that has fueled me for as long as I can remember, from the youngest days of my life. Along the way, of course, I'm going to stumble. I'm going to hit roadblocks. There are things I'm going to need to really, they're burning questions or puzzles that I need to figure out in order to sort of push through the process of creation, because it's never a linear, process. So I'll sort of swap on my scientist hat, and the scientist impulse is all about figuring out things, the burning questions, puzzles, quandaries, problems. Um, and then once I sort of like get the things solved, I'll immediately drop back into this generative mode of make the thing. But you're right in a really interesting way that there's a really powerful similarity between the maker and the scientist. And that's this: that they both spend the vast majority of their time living and working and investing effort in the presence of uncertainty and questions. So the maker, it's all about making ideas manifest, something from nothing, which means you often don't know if that something is possible to be created. You're kind of, you're pushing through and you're taking action, you're investing energy and resources. And oftentimes you have no idea if the thing that you have in your mind, like the vision of it, is actually possible, or if it's going to look
Right.
anything like what you actually think it's going to look like. So you're living in the question, which is really uncomfortable for most people. And the same thing with the scientist, because that is, in fact, your primary impulse, to live in the question. In fact, for the scientist, very often, it is about, finding the answer, like solving the puzzle. Whether something gets made out of that or created that is left behind isn't so important. It's about the question. But both of them spend a vast majority of time living with high levels of uncertainty and question. And you have to develop the skill of making decisions, taking actions, allocating resources when you're in this state of a lot of uncertainty. And that can be really hard for a lot of people, including makers and scientists. Just because you have the impulse to be there doesn't mean that you're necessarily resourced from a mindset standpoint to find a place of equanimity and calmness and to be okay when you're in that space. And that can sometimes be a shared tension between both of those impulses.
The term of certainty jumped out to me, Jonathan, because it's literally been something that I have been kind of on a soapbox with lately, and just kind of feel the, hairs raised in the back of my neck with certainty. I mean, we're in a culture right now where everybody wants to, say with certainty their opinion, their viewpoint, what reality is. And I literally found myself so often going, I am less certain today on most everything than ever. Now, it doesn't mean I'm doubtful necessarily. It doesn't mean I'm optimistic, I'm hopeful and whatever, but to say I'm certain. Yeah. And I love the uncertainty. So part of where I put, as I was learning about the spark types, that I put this towards was wood making. So that's a hobby of mine. I do that. I live up in the forest. I've got a wood mill. And I do not think of myself as a carpenter. I'm not really that good, but I can kind of make functional art, really cool bunk beds for my kids and a deck that's pretty good. But what I've realized is if you give me a blueprint and give me the materials, there's no joy at it all. Just somebody else do it. I love having the raw materials and just having an idea of, we really need a roof over the front door, and just coming out and standing there and looking at it and figuring something out. And it'll wake me up in the morning. If I wake up at night to go to the bathroom at 2 a.m., then all of a sudden I'm thinking about this roof. I don't need to, it's not pressing. It's just for fun. And yet that's where I am in the uncertainty of figuring out how to do this. So you're looking at the types. It literally did what you guys talk about, is I felt like, oh, somebody knows me. And what I loved in reading it, that I want everybody to hear, is realizing it showed me the transferable propensities. It showed me the propensities within myself that are transferable to anything and everything that I do. And that made sense. So for somebody out there who's looking for, gosh, what job, what business, whatever, holy smokes, here's where you'll figure out where you're going to flourish. And if you're not participating in these types, where you're going to languish. That was beautiful.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that. When I was, we spent years developing the types and then building the assessment and testing and validating it. And when I finally sat down to write the book, you always have to ask, if, for me at least, if I'm committing to writing a book, it's a huge amount of time and energy to put into a project, which means I'm saying no to a whole bunch of other things. So when I sit down to write it, I ask myself, what is my intention? What is my intention in writing this? And what is the metric that I'm really looking? How will I know that I feel good about this, before anyone even reads it? And for me, what I kept saying to myself is, what it's a little bit of a weird question, but I would ask myself, what do I want for readers when they read this and when they interact with the whole body of work? And I kept going back to this phrase in my head. I kept thinking to myself, I want people to feel seen, and I kept writing to that. And, I'm drawing at this point from 2.5 decades of research and experimentation and service and consulting, and now over 500,000 people through an assessment with 25 million data points. So there's a lot to draw from, right? And you can hear, by the way, I'm in New York City still for a short while longer.
I literally am used to that. If I have somebody on the show from New York City, we are going to have a siren.
Yeah, 100%, 100%.
Yeah.
So, the question for me was, am I writing in a way where somebody who's reading this, where there's something that literally will land on a visceral, embodied level, they'll feel it physically, like I feel seen. Like there is something about me that maybe I haven't even seen it in myself. I haven't seen myself this way. And it feels like you're understood, you're seen, you're heard, you're held. And that this impulse that you've always known is there, and for so many people they've stifled, is valid. And then you have the language to then turn around and share that with other people, and then ask them the same thing. Like, I want do this work too, so we can see each other at a different level. And then what you just said, what you sort of like wrapped around to, is so powerful too. And I'm glad it actually landed with you, which is this notion that, we spend so much time looking for sort of the surface level job or team or company or industry. And sometimes we find that thing and it gives us that feeling that we want, like we're fully alive and activated. Um, Most of the time we don't, that's what the research bears out. Even though it's slightly better, it's really rare. But even when you do, at some point that job is going to end. And then when you go on to the next thing, you won't understand the deeper impulse, the deeper fundamental nature of the work that gave you that feeling beyond the job title. So you'll go looking for the same job title in a different company. And very often it's not the same actual thing. And you won't feel that thing and you'll wonder what's wrong. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with the setting? What's wrong with the job? So part of what I've been trying to do is go deeper and really understand what is that deeper impulse for effort? Because once we understand it on that level, then like you said, it gives us a certain amount of freedom. We can look for that and find it in so many different domains, jobs, like companies, teams. So it gives us a lot of autonomy when we understand what's actually happening at a deeper level. And that's kind of where I've really been focusing a lot of my work.
Well, so here it again, you took your type. So you created this thing, you took your type, you came out as a maker. And it really stood out to me when I went to your website, jonathanfields.com. What's it do? It says right there, front and center, I make things that move people. I literally thought about that, Jonathan, for my own ventures of saying that is what I do. I've known that for a long time. I've had from my wife to my business partners, whatever and they know as well. My favorite thing is an idea, a possibility, and
Yeah.
a blank sheet of paper. That's it. And I love the framework. Of course, once the framework's done, I'm kind of done. I'm ready to go.
You tap out, you're like, okay, so where's the next thing? Like, where's the next blank piece of paper? And that is such a similar story with makers. I mean, it's sort of like once it's time to sort of like move into incremental growth, systems, process, scale, that's amazing for people of other types. But like the maker, that hyper generative something from nothing stage tends to end. And you're kind of like, okay, it's cool. I'm proud of what I did. And it's almost like you bless it on.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so again, I love the concept of, I've got older kids like you, and as they look at whether it's a job, a career field, or whatever, I mean, we can look at, just pick some of the big ones out there, lawyer, doctor, architect, accountant, whatever, to know their type, to know that thing. Cause I really took it as a kind of an activity, a pulse of what am I going to be engaged with. So for me, am I going to be, if somebody offered me a job or be a part of a business or whatever, what is the role that I'm going to be engaged in, and what am I going to be doing? Am I going to be able to make? Am I going to be doing, the scientific stuff, looking, figuring out how to do this thing or not? Otherwise, we're in trouble. So for my kids, or for anybody listening out there, if you're looking at this role like you talked about, what is the activity you're going to be engaged in day in and day out? And I love that because, man, I have so many interests. I'm sure like you, so many
Yeah.
interests, but I look at those and go, would I like to, like, let's take woodworking. Would I like to do that 8-10 hours a day? No, it's a fun hobby and a fun outlet, but I don't. My other love is a passion is just be outdoors on a trail, running, riding. I mean, I love, it's one of the greatest spices of my life. Do I want to do it day in and day out vocationally? Nope. No, I don't. So even the things that I enjoy, it really helped me look at what am I okay with? Honestly, man, I can sit at a computer and write and create pretty much all day long with those other things thrown in to give me juice. But
Yeah.
that was what felt powerful. I feel like there's no kid that needs to leave high school without knowing their type and knowing this is what I'm going to have to go find a role that fulfills.
Yeah. It's fun to me that you referenced the woodworking a couple times now. So most of my making has been in the sort of like the digital space for the last 10 years. I mean, we've created also a lot of experience design. We ran an adult summer camp for 5 years, the last 4 days of every summer, where we'd have 450 people in a 160-acre sleepaway camp. So, we were designing this immersive experience. But most of what I've been making for a long time now has been non-physical. And I
Me too.
realized,
Me too.
yeah, but it's interesting because it seems like you're okay with that. What I've started
Mhm.
to realize recently is that I'm actually not.
Wow.
So I am really drawn. There's something in me that is really drawn to the physical process of creation, like the actual physical objects. So for me, 3 years ago, I set aside a month and I kind of vanished away. I drove out to rural Pennsylvania. I was living above this partially renovated roadhouse where you'd look out the window and you just see, like cows and fields. And downstairs, it was the upstairs of a roadhouse of a luthier, a guitar builder. And I spent a month working with him, sort of like as a trainee, while we worked side by side. And he walked me through the process of building by hand an acoustic guitar in his workshop, from raw wood all the way through to finished project. We worked 13-hour days with a single 40-minute break. I was, like dog tired by the end of every day, but I was more nourished and fulfilled than I think I have been in a few decades. And
Wow.
I realized that for me, there's been like something that's a little bit missing. I mean, I get to make amazing things and it's really fulfilling, but at the same time, I was like, I couldn't put my finger on it. There was something that wasn't quite right. And what I realized was it's the process of physical making, actually working with my hands with physical objects. That is my highest expression, where I sort of like am most fulfilled, most satisfied by it. So I'm now working on ways to figure out how to get back to that more. I'll never walk away from creating media and podcasts and audio and video and writing. But at the same time, I've actually reconnected with the fact that the physical process for me is really, really powerful and necessary in my life.
Okay, so that's an interesting question, or an interesting perspective that I'll put at you. So let's say that. So let's say we take you and me. We're both come out with maker scientists. So very similar in the endeavors that we want to engage in. And now you just made a distinction between, let's just call it electronic and physical, because yeah, most of my time is in front of a computer creating content, whether it's podcasts, and I'm writing a book now, and even business plans. I mean, it's happening, online, and it's
Right.
and really even in the information stuff, because my businesses don't generally involve a physical product necessarily. So you have been as well. Then we both have these physical outlets, and you're saying you're realizing that you want more physical, and I'm looking at it and going, I kind of have a finite amount there. I'm
Yeah.
not. And we want to put ourselves, I think the propensity then is we're going to put ourselves there and say, okay, so Jonathan's figured out he needs 80% of his making time in the physical. Kevin's figured out 80% in the electronic, and that's it. Okay. And we set ourselves there. The thing that I continue to bump up against is that legitimate? Or because we want a black and white answer, right? Is that it? Or could we look and go, gosh, that's where we find ourselves currently. But what if after the next year, 6 months, year, 3 years, 5 years, and you now immerse yourself in the physical, is it possible you could say, gosh, I don't know, man, I feel like I kind of scratched that itch. I really want to get back into the electronic space. Is that viable, possible, or
Yeah.
is it? Well, but for people to look out there, do they? Because I tend to want to say, look, be open to seasons and cycles instead of us labeling ourselves and this is what it is for eternity. What do you
Yeah.
think?
And actually, I completely agree with that. To me, what we're seeing, and this is my take right now, and like, wearing the scientist hat, I always have to hold myself open to the possibility that, like enough data will come in that, there's an evolution of thought. But here's where I am right now. To me, the underlying impulse, the fundamental impulse to create, what we're seeing across most people is that stays fairly consistent for life, barring really major traumatic change or really, really big things that happen in life that literally rewire your brain. But the way that it gets expressed in any given moment over a period of life, like you said, cycles or seasons may evolve. You may find yourself really drawn to one medium or one mode of creation for a window of life, and it just feels like it's amazing, and that may actually consume you for your entire life. I have friends that started painting when they were 6 and never stopped. And they have no desire to ever work with any other form of creation. And then I have friends where it's been an evolutionary process where they started physical, and maybe then they started coding when they were in their teens and they absolutely loved it. And then they got exposed to hardware. And then, because the coding led them to this different aspect of the creation process. And then they got really into actual, like the hardware side of creation. And then maybe later in life, like they hit their 60s and they want to start writing. And so my sense is the underlying impulse stays fairly consistent, but the way that it is expressed can be a blend at any given time. It can evolve as like an intense focus on one channel for a season. To me, that is entirely unique to every individual, and certainly can change and evolve over time.
Do you feel in your research and in the utilization of the spark types that people are generally able to tap into what is natural and true to them, as opposed to finding that some people are pretty removed from it because of, I'm always interested in the nature versus nurture discussion
Yeah.
and natural versus environmental. So, I grew up in a home, all I knew was entrepreneurship. My dad never worked for another soul. I had no concept, and I don't today. I've never done that. Now I have a bunch of kids, and we've had to address that as I put them into, they all do farmers market. We start them off in business
Right,
early.
right.
And then I'll never forget, my oldest son at one point said, I just don't know if it's for me. I really like more direction than what I get in entrepreneurship, what he gets from me. I'm not I'm just, hey, there's the goal, you figure it out. And he's like, that doesn't work for me. And so I've had to look at that. And I think I hope I've done a good job of opening my kids up to not just my own brainwashing. But back to that, do you find that people sometimes have to struggle with the environmental programming that maybe pull them away from their nature, or are most of them pretty apt to come in and figure that out?
Yeah, no, I think it definitely rears its head in different ways. And also, what we've seen is it's different for different types. So I'll give an interesting example. The maker very often shows itself really early in life. And I don't think it's because it actually, arises any earlier than any of these impulses. I think it's because it's socially rewarded and introduced way earlier. So, you go to school in preschool, or like even as a toddler, what do you do to keep yourself busy? Well, you give your kid crayons or toys or blocks to build with.